So in previous slides, we've looked at how the immune response is going to go ahead and activate in response to an infection, and it's going to activate B and T cells. Okay, so what we're going to focus on now is what happens when you have exposure to the same infectious agent, so a second time. So again, you're going to have this APC, antigen presenting cell. It's going to be most likely something like a macrophage, although it can be a dendritic cell. And they're going to go ahead and take those antigens and put them on the surface of their MHC class II molecule. These guys can also release chemical signals called interleukins. So the macrophage can release interleukin 1, which is what this is supposed to be representing, and that can directly communicate with other white blood cells like the helper T cells. And then of course they can release cytokines to go ahead and again chemically speak with and activate B cells. They can actually do this again through one way is chemically, and the other way is through talking with their MHC class II molecules directly and activate B cells. But B cells can also activate T cells. So this is a way that the whole entire immune system can communicate with each other. They can communicate directly through receptors. They can communicate indirectly with chemicals. Now, once you have a secondary infection, this is happening much more rapidly, and then the B cells are going to go ahead and clone themselves to either make memory B cells, and they're going to go ahead and hide out. It depends on the infection, where the infection takes place, how long these memory B cells last. And then they make plasma cells, which can help make the antibodies. So these plasma cells, they're going to be the ones for the primary response. They're going to be the first response, okay? So there's going to be a prolific production of antibodies. And these guys are going to have a lot of rough ER. So think about it, rough ER, right? Endoplasmic reticulum, because they've got a lot of ribosomes to go ahead and synthesize those proteins, because what are these little antibodies? Basically proteins. Okay, and then the memory cells again are going to be made, and that is going to be for a secondary response. And that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this time. We're talking about a response that is going to be fast and effective, and it's going to help prevent infection. And this is going to be really based for long-term immunity. So this is where we're going to look at right here when we're looking at, again, long-term immunity. So the first exposure, we're going to be looking here, antigen A. Let's say you're going to get exposed to, I don't know, chicken pox, right? You're going to go ahead and have your initial exposure, and it's going to take a while for the cells to communicate with each other. The macrophages are going to go ahead and present. You're going to go ahead and talk to the B cells. Those B cells are going to go ahead and clone themselves, okay, into memory and to plasma B cells. Somewhere in there, you're going to have helper T cells that are going to talk to one another, and that they can help activate B cells as well. Okay, and that can activate other things like cytotoxic T cells. So in this time, you're really mounting an immune response. And then you're going to help to create these antibodies that are going to go ahead and attack the invader. We'll look at how those antibodies attack the invader in a little bit. But what ends up happening if you're ever exposed again, so here is your secondary exposure. Remember, you made memory B cells. So they are going to go ahead and much more rapidly produce antibodies for the secondary response. So you're going to increase speed, okay? It's going to happen much faster. Look at the amount of time, okay, the peak. And then here in terms of how much, again, that's the peak, right? So you're doing it faster and you're making more. And those are going to help to clear out that pathogen in a more effective manner. So if you go ahead and get the antibody infection here, sorry, we were interrupted by the loudspeaker. I tried to stop that. But if you are exposed to another infection, while you might even be responding to a secondary reaction here, you're going to go through the primary immune response for another illness, right? So if you get, let's say, flu, your body is going to go ahead and mount the primary response for antigen B. and then still for whatever we were talking about before, let's say if that was the chickenpox, I think we said, then they're going to go through their secondary immune response. So the main idea is that these memory cells are really what's driving this. So they're going to be remaining dormant, but they respond really quickly if they're exposed to an antigen for a second time. So that's why vaccines are really important, and we'll go into vaccines in a minute, but I just want to kind of go over one quick aspect. So if you have something like chickenpox, right? So this thing that we looked at in blue to begin with, why are you only getting exposed to chickenpox once and then you have long-term immunity versus something like the flu where you have to get a vaccine, a different vaccine every single year? And it has to do with the type of virus, the pathway that it activates, and then also the mutation rate. So something like chickenpox is pretty steady in terms of its genetics, but something like flu can rapidly mutate. So it's going to change very frequently. So you're going to go ahead and need to get new antibodies in the form of a vaccine every year to kind of update your immunological response. So I just wanted to look at this again. These are all things that you probably have already come across, but I want to make sure that everybody's okay with this. So antigen recognition happens in a lot of different fronts. So one thing that kind of gets confused, I've noticed a lot, is the term antigen and epitope. So when you're looking at a pathogen, right, a B cell is going to have antigen receptors, and then they can go ahead and respond by making antibodies. So when you're looking at this, an epitope is a part of the antigen molecule which an antibody can attach itself. So this is the antigen, right? And there are different sections. Those are the epitopes. And it depends on the type of antibody your body is going to be making. For example, you can have a linear epitope. And that's when you have amino acid residues that are adjacent in the polypeptide chain. They're right next to each other. Versus a discontinuous epitope, which is created from an amino acid residue located in different parts of the polypeptide. And that's actually kind of interesting because that's why some people are going to be allergic to raw apples and not allergic when you cook them. Okay, because that's going to change versus the way that this antibody is perceiving the protein. And that's how your immune system is working. It's going to create all these antibodies right here, and they are going to bind to certain regions of the antigen in these epitope regions. And again, these antibodies can help dispose of the antigen by either neutralization, right? That's where the antibodies bind to the viral surface of proteins, and they can help prevent infections of the host cells. And then there's opsonization, where antibodies bind to the antigens on bacteria that are present, and they call over macrophages to help kind of increase phagocytosis. And then, of course, you can bind to the actual antigen molecules and try to reduce their ability to infect a cell. And then we talked about the complement system the other day. So the antibodies can help increase the chances that these proteins will come and help lyse the cells. So all of these, right, antibodies are going to help bind and increase phagocytosis, which is of course going to eat the pathogens. And since there's going to be lots and lots of different types of B cells, those that are responding to the antigen are going to go ahead and clone themselves. And they're going to make lots and lots of clones, okay? The clones are going to become these effector cells. They're short-lived plasma B cells. They're going to make a lot of antibodies, okay? And then they can even help activate helper or cytotoxic T cells in their response. Now, why are vaccines so important? That's because they're teaching the immune system how to respond. So you get this secondary immune response, again, faster and more antibodies. There's several myths that are circulating around, and I just kind of wanted to go over them really quickly. One of them is that vaccines cause autism. That is absolutely 120% not true. The paper that originally suggested this correlation in 1997 was completely retracted, so it has absolutely no basis of truth. The infants' immune systems can't handle many vaccines is another massive myth, Based on the number of antibodies present in the blood, a baby could theoretically have the ability to respond to around 10,000 vaccines at one time. And even if you're just scheduling all 14 at once, which we don't do, it's only going to use about 0.1% of the immune capability of that infant. So again, this is completely unwarranted. Natural immunity is better than vaccine-acquired immunity is, again, completely not true. I mean, just the sheer dangers of this approach far outweigh any relative benefits. I mean, think about what's happening with measles, right? In terms of measles, if you get the disease, you face a 1 in 500 chance of death, and there's a 10% correlation in deafness that are associated. So 1 in 500 chance of death versus getting a vaccine, the MMR vaccine, right? Which is astronomically small of having complications at all. So not true. Again, vaccines aren't worth the risk. Despite certain types of groups of parents, children have been successfully vaccinated for decades. There's never been a single credible study linked to vaccines to any type of long-care health issue. So this is not true. I actually hear this one quite a lot. Vaccines infect my child with the disease it's trying to prevent. Factually, not possible. Vaccines can cause mild symptoms resembling those of the disease that they're protecting against, but it's a super common misconception that these symptoms are signaling infection. Okay? Less than 1 in 1 million cases have the vaccine recipients experience any body immune response to the actual vaccine itself, but it's not the disease. So if someone's like, oh, I got the flu vaccine and I got the flu, no, you didn't. It does take time for that vaccine to help build immunological learning and memory. So you might have gotten the vaccine and then become infected with the flu shortly after that and not had enough antibodies to mount immune response. That might be true, but you did not get the flu from the vaccine. Okay? And then here, we don't need to vaccinate here because infection rates are already so low in the United States. Well, thanks to herd immune systems where people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that is okay. But even the unimmunized minority, in terms of the unimmunized minority, yeah, they are the minority, I guess, luckily here. There are some people who just cannot get vaccines, people that are immunocompromised to begin with, or people that have certain types of egg allergies. We are endangering them. Just recently, there was a child who had just recovered and was in remission of leukemia, and they could not get the MMR vaccine, or somehow they could not be immunized because of their immune system. And as they were recovering from leukemia, they actually died from measles, which is just an absolute shame. So yes, herd immunity does help, but you're really not helping everybody else around you. Because again, there's always going to be a portion of the population, infants, pregnant women, elderly, whose weakened immune system can't really receive vaccines. And then the last thing is just this active immune system, and that's where you and your body is really learning how to mount that immune response. So you can either do this through your body getting infections and then learning these responses by itself and creating the secondary immune system response. You can get it through vaccinations. Okay, so that's active. And then there's also passive, and the way you're getting that is through your mother. You can get it through mother's milk, through breastfeeding, because antibodies can travel through breast milk, and then you also get some antibodies across the placenta. So hope that's helpful, and that is the secondary immune response.